Welcome to America's Commercial Real Estate Show, your source for market intel, forecasts, and strategies. Hello, I am Michael Bull, and I know you're glad you are not. Thanks for being with us. Well, this segment is brought to you by commercialagentsuccess.com. If you know a commercial real estate agent, tell them to check out commercialagentsuccess.com. They'll be glad they did. Well, today we're going to talk about a subject that we hear is very important to everyone in real estate, and it's cybersecurity. Now, before you change the channel on me, we're going to make this easier. We're going to give you some ideas to help you and help you get a handle on it. And this is not just for the internet type online kind of things. Now, we're going to talk about buildings and real estate. So this is very important for you to know if you have anything to do with commercial real estate. Please welcome my guest. It's Tom Shircliff, and he's co-founder with Intelligent Buildings, and he's joining us on Skype. Tom, thanks for being with us.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me.
Well, Tom, and kind of where I started the intro there is because some people kind of glaze over, talk about cybersecurity. Wait, I'm not a IT geek, right? But we're talking to real estate people here, right, around the country. And I like the way you're explaining it to me. You really kind of want to think about cybersecurity really in kind of two main buckets, right?
Yeah, I mean, everybody hears about cybersecurity in the news, and you think about credit card records and HR database and these kind of things, and that is really important. And in real estate, we do have that with asset management records and work order management and those things, in the back office, and that is important. But what does not get enough attention is really what we all in real estate do for a living, and that is the buildings themselves, the front of house, if you will. And in the front of house, we have building control systems like HVAC, elevator, lighting, parking, metering, access control, and so on. And what people don't maybe realize is that for almost 40 years, since somewhere in the 80s, all of these control systems that we thought were just dirty fingernail type systems are built on computers with little networks and have remote access to the internet. So these are just little networks everywhere, and it's becoming a real problem.
Yeah. So you have the cybersecurity most people kind of think about in the beginning, right, with their computers and their phones and their networks, and they have people for that, right? They typically have their IT people for that side.
Yeah, and also that is as important as it is. It's a very established segment. There are lots of providers for that, and there are a lot of solutions for that. It's a mature conversation, although complicated and important as it is. What, again, we're not paying that much attention to is again, what we all do in the buildings. And that takes a little bit different type of resource. We've been in the management consulting space around smart buildings for 15 years now. And one thing that we found is that traditional, let's call it big IT, has not done very well in smart buildings and this type of cybersecurity in buildings because, as we all know, there is a particular culture around property management, facility management, contractors, subcontractors, system integrators. That's a very multi-decade established culture and environment, and it just doesn't work the same way as IT does. So you're right, it takes a little bit different lens to look at it and deal with it.
Right, and as you mentioned, all these systems that are in all of our buildings all around us, most of those are controlled or accessed online. So someone that has ill intent for you might come in through one of those kind of weaker systems and maybe get into your accounting and other things?
Yeah, so that's what you're referring to is what a lot of people call network hopping. So even if you were tending to your back office things as you should with a more traditional IT solution, if any of those people in your back office have anything to do or any view into the control systems and so forth, just by looking at them, If someone came in through an old DSL line that was connected to your parking system for remote maintenance, they now potentially could hop onto your corporate network, and that is a problem. But I will tell you that network hopping is a real risk and a problem. But what we're talking about now is a hacking situation. And I think what we need to realize is that there are a lot more operational risk on just the outside in or the hacking. So let's just take a quick example of a generic REIT, let's say that has 100 buildings, just to use round numbers. And if we took HVAC, elevator, lighting, metering, parking, irrigation, kind of go down the list of all these digital control systems, you might have as many as 10 control systems in a building. So 100 buildings, 10 systems, you have 1,000 control systems. And if you're really good, you may have consolidated your contractors down to only having, let's say, 300 contractors, right? Yeah. So now I'm thinking, wow, do I even know what systems are in what building? Do I know who all the contractors are? And do I know what they have done in configuring all those individual systems? And the point I'm making here now is that this is really more of an inside-out problem, meaning with your systems and your contractors, than it is at first an outside-in problem with hackers. It's definitely an issue, you got to deal with it. But I would wake up more worried that I have 1,000 control systems and I don't even have an inventory of what they are, what version they are, exactly who manages them, and more importantly, what they've done to configure each of those systems. And I'll give you a couple of examples of why the configuring is important. In each of those systems, let's just elevator system, there is information as to whether or not it has a password, whether or not there are too many super users set up, whether old contractors have been removed from the system, whether the software is current on it, and if it's ever been backed up. So there are real operational risks, and it's really, Michael, an important point as we're talking about this inside-out approach, that now you might not even call it cybersecurity as much as you call it vendor risk management. And there are a lot of analysts in the industry that say vendor risk management is increasingly one of the most important risk issues for real estate executives.
Yeah, and what do you say to the building owner? Maybe he owns one building and there's 1 or 2 or 3 systems in his building, and he says, "Well, look, I have insurance for that, don't I?"
That's a good point. And whether it's 1 building or 100 buildings, as management consultants on these topics, we actually looked into the insurance issue as an executive risk topic. And wow, were we surprised. We talked to a lot of the main carriers, as well as the large aggregators like Aon, Willis, Gallagher, Marsh, and we got essentially the same answer across the board, is that it sounded like a risk issue. Nobody had brought it up. And it, generally speaking, was not addressed in general liability, property and casualty, or in most cyber riders. So you ask a really important question, and that's a little bit more of a validator to this topic. And one more point on that, they said it was, I'm not sure how comforting it was, but they said, third-party risk was probably a more covered, meaning if somebody died in an elevator, whereas first-party risk, if there was malware and a chiller from ransomware because of one of your maintenance people, that probably wasn't covered. So again, this vendor risk management and this inside-out approach is really the bigger, more immediate problem.
Yeah, and if you will, as real estate people, how might we think about this? How might we start to kind of get an idea of how to manage this?
Well, I think that's really the good news, because when we say cybersecurity, everybody just thinks, where do I even start? Algorithms and firewalls and, big IT and these kind of things. But what we've been talking about for the past few minutes here is really something as fragmented and complicated as it is. It's something we can all understand. Literally, the blind spot is knowing what systems, what contractors, and what they've done. And so, again, we call that the blind spot because I mentioned the word fragmentation. What that means, as we all know in real estate, is that your parking contractor probably doesn't manage your HVAC, and your lighting contractor probably doesn't manage your elevator, right? So their fragmentation is a given. And the other thing we all know is turnover, right? So whether it's property management changes in companies, facility management, staff changes, contractor rebids for maintenance and so forth. So fragmentation and turnover. Very difficult place to get an inventory and then much less a risk assessment. So all that being said, that's a lot of blocking and tackling, but it's not rocket science to do it. We found it really helps to have a tool purpose built for that. Spreadsheets kind of get out of control and project management tools don't work. But given that you can have a tool and hopefully somebody that knows what they're doing, it's really not about the head-hurting, IT algorithms and firewalls at first.
Yeah, and I liked under the classification where you put it, where kind of property managers and asset managers can kind of get a handle on. It's basically inventory and assessment, right?
Yeah, inventory assessment. And as you were describing some of those categories, just want to go back to an earlier point that we were talking about, that since the 80s, all of these systems have been digital, and means they work on computers, they have operating systems and protocols, and they work on networks, and they're internet accessible. But if you think about it for a second, for 40 years, those little digital systems, and sometimes big ones, have been designed, installed, and maintained by a real estate value chain that has no IT experience. So let's just think architects, engineers, GCs, contractors, facility managers, property managers, and asset managers for 4 decades. So you can imagine the digital mess that we have out there and the operational risk that creates.
Yeah, so kind of the first step is kind of really just kind of inventory that, right? Kind of figure out what systems you have.
Yeah, because even if you came in with a magic solution, you wouldn't know what you're doing it on or who you're doing it to whom. So inventory and of all of those things, and some form of assessment. We like to use, I don't want to get too technical, but we like to use a government cyber standard called NIST. It's just a framework for thinking about cyber risk. So an inventory and some kind of assessment. And then after that, you move into obviously a remediation phase. And I want to just add again for those watching today, that the remediation phase can be largely dealt with policy. I mean, I'm going to be silly, but it's almost that easy. All contractors must have complex passwords. All systems must be backed up. All systems must have the current revision of the manufacturer's software within 6 months. I mean, these are really basic things, but the remediation phase can go there. Now, again, we may end up, or the customer may end up putting some kind of a black box or remote access tool or service. That's fine. But I just want to give the real estate executives some relief that inventory is an inventory. A policy is something that is largely common sense, because usually there is none today. And then the final piece of that might be that you then develop some way to monitor compliance with the policy. So if we do that, wow, you've really come a long way, whether or not we're dealing with the networking side, which is appropriate, but not the first instinct of a lot of real estate managers.
Yeah. But now you've helped us kind of concept it, if you will, as we think about kind of in the commercial real estate world. Hey, what's your inventory? Let's look at each one and kind of assess it, and then figure out, all right, now what need to be our policies kind of moving forward with all of the vendors and people who touch this thing, right? And what are the passwords, and how often are things updated and backed up, right?
Yeah, and actually, we've seen some of our larger customers, after going through some of that, are moving to a little bit more of a vendor consolidation approach. Because again, if you have however many buildings you have times at least 3 to 5 control systems, sometimes 10 or 12, times the number of contractors, it really can get unruly, even if you have a policy and even if you're monitoring that policy compliance. So it's something else to consider. thinking about consolidating the number of vendors and qualifying them, and using not only the quality of their service and their product as a criteria, but whether or not they get it in terms of the portfolio owners or managers' policy and policy requirements, and whether they can even adhere to that. And so we're seeing consolidation as one of the destinations for the conversation.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And I think we all kind of get maybe the malware hopping if something comes up on a simple system that some malware can infect, and then it kind of jumps onto more serious applications that we use in our business every day. But also just in the equipment alone, I mean, there are some challenges with those systems going down because of these cyber risk, right? It's not just it happened. Just the systems themselves can cause some serious issues.
Yeah, and that inventory is going to help in a lot of ways, just as you're describing from an operational risk perspective, because you would not believe the decades-old computers that are running a lot of our buildings. And when you upgrade certain components of a control system, it may take down the server because it just can't keep up. So really knowing what computer is the system's running on, and its software, the manufacturer's software for the HVAC, elevator, lighting, metering, parking, is really important just from a daily operational risk perspective. And let's don't forget that the turnover aspect of that. Somebody takes over the control system, maybe even a property manager takes over with total P&L. Did they plan on upgrading or replacing systems? Maybe not. Let's get it to work as long as our contract lasts. I mean, this is becoming, the digital mess is certainly a cyber issue, but there's more to it, as you're describing, than that, just in daily operational risk and order, really.
Yeah. And it's good to bring up, because I think, we may forget about the computers and software that's running our systems, but our everyday computers that we use. I mean, I'll turn around and my IT guy will say, well, your computer's no good. The thing's 3 years old. And I'm like, wait a minute. It seems like I just bought it yesterday. What do you mean this thing's old? It's a piece of crap now. So there's a lot of old systems out there and that running our properties. And so what are some things you might have? Life safety issues? You should have some systems going down that cause you some legal problems. Those are kind of issues to think about. Maybe
no, it's a good question, because sometimes when we have this discussion with the portfolio, they say, okay, I get it, it's a problem, I don't know what's out there, but what's the real problem? I'm hot for a couple of hours, or I'm inconvenienced, right? And we say no, and to your point, Michael, it's if somebody can either maliciously or even inadvertently get control of your elevator or your lighting, metering, and your parking, there are certainly life safety issues, whether intentional, ill-intended or accidental. We talked about network hopping. We touched on insurance. There are regulatory compliance issues that you're responsible for, there's in the IT world, there's a regular audit process around their process and controls, just how they run the railroad. And as these regulatory bodies are looking at these corporations and REITs and hospitals and campuses and so forth, they're saying, wait a minute, you've got dozens or hundreds of networks that are not in your process and controls audit process. And so that's something that is coming, whether we like it or not. If it's a network and it's internet connected and you have regulatory issues, that's going to be a deal. And then also, if you are a landlord or a property manager, and one of these problems we discussed causes a tenant not to be able to occupy a building with no danger, let's say ransomware in your HVAC system in July, and you can't occupy the building for a couple of days. What's the tenant going to do in terms of legal and productivity loss and that kind of stuff? So there are real consequential issues to this.
And even if you think your lease protects you there, it still doesn't help your reputation.
Well, that's a great point, because the final bullet point on what can go wrong is really brand damage. Whether or not you have insurance, which we know is a maybe, and whether or not your lease and other things protect you, it's just not going to be good for the brand, whether it's the corporation or the landlord or the property manager or even the tenant. and you could even go all the way into the manufacturer of the system that had a problem. So it's just not, and we've had this happen in some cases. And one other thing I'd like to add is that since we do this for a living, we know there are a lot of cases of this, both operational problems and even the ransomware and so forth. The reason that your listeners don't hear about this is because usually it's only personal information that's required to be announced or divulged. So I can tell you that it is happening out there quietly, but growing.
Well, it's an interesting topic because when we do these update shows with real estate professionals and economists and analysts who look at some of the risk out there in commercial real estate, I'm continuing to hear about cybersecurity. And Tom, thanks for coming on and telling us, hey, there's more than just our computers, our networks. We need to look at our buildings and make sure we're safe there. Any parting tip for our listeners, Tom?
Yeah, no, just a couple thoughts. One is, it is just a common sense blind spot that you have if you don't know what systems, what contractors, and what they've done to it. And I would encourage you to do that. And also I would add that we're also industry advocates. So if anybody wanted to reach out to us, I'm happy to communicate the things that we did in this conversation without it being a sales pitch, just as an industry advocate, because it is such a big problem. And we really don't want our industry to get a black eye if this thing starts rolling.
Yeah, a good point. So Tom Shircliff, and he's with Intelligent Buildings. Look him up if you have any questions. Tom, sir, thanks for being on the show.
Enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
And do look him up. It's Intelligent Buildings. We'll have his website link on the show website, which is commercialrealestateshow.com. Thank you for joining us. Let us know your thoughts. We appreciate you sharing the show. And please do connect with us on your favorite social media. I'm Michael Bull. Until next week, be sure that you always lead, learn, and laugh. And join us for America's Commercial Real Estate Show. America's Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you by Bull Realty. For customized asset and occupancy solutions, visit bullrealty.com. Commercial Agent Success Strategies. Incredible training for commercial agents. Visit commercialagentsuccess.com.